Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is welcome to the Albuquerque Journal. We are really excited to have you here in our series. This is of candidates for governor. This is four-term former mayor of Las Cruces, Ken Miyagishima. We're really excited to have him to talk about the issues facing the state of New Mexico and his independent candidacy for the office, which means that even though the primaries are coming up in June, he won't be on the ballot in June, but he will be on the ballot in November. As always, if you want to ask a question online, it should be very obvious and where you can ask questions, and I've got all of those coming in directly to me. Or if you're in the audience, there are QR codes on either side where you can just click on those QR codes, and that will enable you to ask a question. So we're really hopeful you can ask a question. This is a part of a series, the third in our gubernatorial series. We'll be doing the next candidate, I believe, who is it, Ryan? Well, the next candidate scheduled is Sam Bregman, but he's scheduled for May 5th, and that's going to push back to the end of the month of May. But Deb Holland is scheduled for May 22nd, so hopefully we can come to one or both of those moving forward. Would love to have you for those. In between, we're also going to start to do, we've done other town halls on topic matters, so we're going to have a few other town halls coming soon, I believe is the mayor.
Finalize TNM and Blackstone and Greg Hull.
Oh, that's right. Where we have Greg Hull coming, who's also another candidate for governor. And then we have PNM Blackstone. We'll be doing one hopefully with them in June. And then also the mayor talking about his agenda for the final term. So lots of exciting topics and people coming to talk here. So we're really excited to have you here at the Journal and online watching us. Please ask lots of questions. I always try to get every question in. And we're really excited to host Ken here. Just as a matter of introductions, my name is Jay Newton-Small. I'm the executive editor of the Albuquerque Journal. And Ryan?
And hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Botel. I'm the opinion page editor here.
And I'm Jeff Tucker, a columnist. And thank you all for coming.
So I'm going to hand the first question over to Ken and just say, please introduce yourself to the audience and give us a little opening statement about your candidacy.
Sure.
Actually, you're mic'd up, so you're good.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. And thank you again for allowing me to come here today. I know that there's been a few places that I had been invited to, and then when they found out there were 4 other independents, they just said, you know what, we're only going to take those that are on the ballot. So my name is Ken Miyagishima. On my, just a little bit about myself. So on my paternal side, my father's side, my grandparents immigrated from Japan. On my maternal side, my mom's side, my grandparents immigrated from Mexico, and my great-grandmother was Mescalero Apache. So basically a triracial. I was born in Keesler Air Force Base, Biloxi, Mississippi. We moved to Vandenberg Air Force Base. My dad had to go overseas in 1968. We moved to Alamogordo. We stayed there for a few years, and we came to Las Cruces in 1971, and I've been a resident of Las Cruces since 1971. I'm married. I have 4 children. I'm a I'm technically on leave at the university. I teach. I'm a finance professor. I'm a business owner of 35 plus years. And I've had 30 years experience in public office, starting as a county commissioner for Doña Ana County from 1992 to 2000, city councilor from 2001 to 2006, and then mayor of Las Cruces for 4 four-year terms from 2007 to 2023. So I feel I bring a lot of different vast background and experience to the governor's office. I was when I was county commissioner, I was a county commissioner for the Democratic Party, but it was a little bit different when I got involved here last year. It was different than it was when I first started. And in order to move this state forward, I feel that I have to be able to use policies from all parties, from all the people. And this isn't about a party, it's about you, the people. And I felt that this is the best way to do this, the best way to unite New Mexico. Because there's so much division. I have never, I've been around for a while, and I've never seen it this bad. But I feel, if I could sum it up, the other night I was at a convenience store here, and I was getting some ice, and I told this gentleman I was running for governor. He said, what party, Democrat or Republican? And I said, independent. And he looked at me, and he smiled. He says, you know what, that's great, I'll vote for you. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, this is what you're seeing, what you're hearing out there. People want to get back to the way it used to be a few years back, but right now it's just so divisive. And I remember when I first was elected in 07, there was some of that there in Las Cruces, and we were able to bring that together. I won re-election in 2011 with two other people running against me with a 62% is what I received. And so I was able to bring those factions together, and that's what I believe I can do as governor. Thank you.
Would you say that you've left the Democratic Party or that the Democratic Party has left you?
Well, let's put it this way. I'm a moderate. I like to make sure that the money's there, but I also do have a social conscience. And so now the social conscience is still there. And I would explain to some of my colleagues, we really can't afford this. We really can't afford that. In fact, I think you all had an article in today's paper where the city of Las Cruces, we were the best run city 8 years in a row, top #1 in the state, and 7 years in a row, top 10 in the nation. We were one year we were number 11. And what I'm trying to get at is, and I see this where the city is struggling right now. They're having to put a freeze. We've never had that problem. When I left them, I said, do me a favor, don't raise taxes and don't spend our Telshore fund. That Telshore fund was $40 million, totally unencumbered. That's how I was able to deal with the situations during the administration Trump 1.0, because we had to handle a lot of things. We'd pay for it, and then we'd get our money back later. But it didn't interrupt our services. So that's a kind of a long way of saying it. I guess what I'm trying to say is it wasn't the same party it was when I first got elected. Totally different now.
In your 16 years as mayor, what were your most successful accomplishments for the city of Las Cruces?
Sorry, can I just stick on that topic first before? Okay, on that topic, I do have a question from Dan Boyd, who is our political correspondent. He wishes he could be here, but he had a family conflict. He asks, have you been in touch with the Forward Party about possibly being their nominee for this year's race?
So that was interesting. The day before they endorsed me as a governor candidate, as a Democrat, I met with Mr. Pearls, and he said, Ken, what happens if you were to lose the primary? Would you consider running as a forward candidate? And I thought, I don't know. I thought about it. And so on January 26th, I emailed him or texted him. I said, you know what? I think I'd like to move forward with that. And I said, but I got to change my registration. Because you have to, when the governor signs a proclamation, on that day, whatever party you are, you have to be that party. That's the party you can run under. And he said, no, you don't need to do that because we have this special exclusion or a special dispensation that you don't need to do that. And I said, well, let me just do it anyways. That's the safe side. Just decline to state. Fast forward, we were in discussion, and then I could just tell, my political sense was telling me, there's something happening here. It's not working like what I thought. And then I just decided, and it just wasn't moving fast enough. And we have to get 14,000 signatures, and that's why my lieutenant governor running mate here is passing out our little card, so you can scan that QR code. Bottom line is, I decided to not go that route because under your name it would say Forward Party, and I don't know if it's been. I didn't want to confuse the public, because they may not know what the Forward Party is. You don't know what they stand for. This way here, it'll just say independent. And I thought this was the best opportunity to do this.
Being independent is tough in that you don't have the apparatus of the party to support you. You've raised reportedly about $105,000 for your campaign, and nearly half that amount came in the form of a personal loan. Is that enough money, do you think, to run a statewide race?
No, that's why we need about $1 million from you guys tonight. If you go to kenfornewmexico.com. Okay, so I'll be real candid with you. We do it a little bit different. I was just talking with my running mate. I said, I'll never forget this. Former governor, he said, Ken, you want to run for governor, you got to learn how to sell your soul. And I said, I can't do that, Governor. I just can't do that. It's not going to happen. He says, well, then it's going to be really difficult for you. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I enjoy what I'm doing. I believe that I have the solutions to move New Mexico forward. We have our game plan. We are doing various things. But, and I've been financing it primarily myself. I mean, that's kind of how it goes. But I was explaining to some people, I'm not a great fundraiser because I don't want to necessarily suggest that those who make these huge contributions want something, but there's a lot of things that seem to, when you follow the money, you wonder why they gave so much.
Last question on this topic from one of the attendees here, I believe, John Malaki. He asks, how would you govern differently than either party?
Okay, so let me go back to when I was mayor. I had one vote. The only thing that the charter allowed me to do was propose policy. I had to convince, of the 6 council members, I had to convince 3 of them to see my way. And so what I'm trying to get at is this. The governors, I think, that we've had have done their best, but where the bottleneck happens is in the legislature. There's a crisis of governance when you have some of these key senators or representatives who block legislation that's meaningful that can move the state forward. And so I do have a way. I will use the same method that I did as mayor, and if you'd like, I can share that with you, on how I propose on moving things forward. Because once you get the majority of who I refer to as my board of directors, these state senators and state representatives, once I get the majority of them moving and seeing what I want, what I think the people would want, we'll move the state forward.
I'd love to hear that.
Sure. So let's say, for example, I need particular legislation to move forward. I would have my senior advisor probably visit with the legislator, and they're going to say, you know what, the governor really needs this. And they're going to say, I don't know if I'm going to really want to do this. Well, okay, it's kind of like we're going to do it in a couple steps here. First step is they're going to let the legislator know that then most likely the governor is going to call a town hall meeting in your district, and hopefully you're going to be there. If you're not, he's going to explain the virtues why this needs to be done. And he's going to get your constituents, the ones who elect you, to come on board. So they still may be a little bit difficult. They're going to say, well, good luck. Okay, if that doesn't work, then we're going to ratchet up a little bit. So another person's going to come back and say, listen, the governor really, really needs this. He's already met with your constituents. They like it. And if they say, well, I still can't change my vote. And he says, well, I think there's a difference between the state. The governor can do what they call a line item veto that the president can't do. They can actually line item a particular bill and just basically remove that money from that particular legislator. And so that's step number 2. The third one is even tougher. I don't know if I should say it, but it's basically...
Gotta say it.
Basically, if those first 2 don't work, then we'll start looking for a candidate that I can work with, and we'll defeat them.
Wow, that is tough.
That is tough.
Shelley Barker, an audience member, asks, can we sign your petition even if we are not registered as an independent?
Yes. Democrat, Republican, Independent, doesn't matter what party, can sign this petition.
So you talked about those strategies and how you can get your policies through. When you were mayor, what were your big successes in Las Cruces?
We built City Hall, and what I call it was, it didn't cost us, the money that we were spending on the old City Hall, we haven't, because it was old. We spent a lot of money to fix it. We were able to basically build a new City Hall with the same amount of money that we're spending on the old City Hall. So we built a new City Hall, we built a convention center, aquatic center, a Olympic-sized swimming pool. We built a water laboratory. We did a full park, a circle around the city, a multi-use park. We built a sports complex, and I'm sure there's a couple others that we did the recycling, a few other things that were really, really, really fun, and we had a great time. Las Cruces was on the move.
And how is Las Cruces now? Our southern New Mexico reporter, there's been issues with juvenile crime, writes about affordable housing a lot, other issues that come up. What's happened to Las Cruces since you've left?
Can I read something on juvenile crime? So apparently, do I have time? Yeah. Apparently there was the prom was this weekend. I've been in Albuquerque since Friday night. And things started changing in 2017. We started seeing more and more crime. Started seeing a little bit more homeless. We just started seeing a lot of things. that wasn't there. And I can tell you what changed. But I want to share this. This is something that came off of Facebook. It's called Las Cruces Community Watch. It wasn't necessarily sent to me, but it was there for the public to read. And it's very candid, to the point. It doesn't say who wrote it. It just was from a mom. It says, well, I take it as from a mom. It says, my daughter attended a party after prom last night. She was shocked to see how many young men were toting and brandishing firearms as well as drinking alcohol. Her and her friends decided to leave, fearing for their safety. I would like to address the parents of the majority of young men in Las Cruces, especially those whose sons attend public schools. What the hell are you doing? Are you blind, deaf, and dumb that you're oblivious to the fact that your sons are carrying weapons? Most of them aren't even 18 years old. Do you not check bedrooms, backpacks, or their vehicles anymore? When I was a teenager, my mother constantly snooped through my room and my belongings. Do you just turn a blind eye? What is the issue? When it boils down to it, you, the parents, are the problem. You want to boo-hoo and send your thoughts and prayers and stupid sad emojis when innocent victims' lives are taken by irresponsible idiots like your own gun-toting sons, but don't address the issue in your own homes. What are you waiting for? Another tragedy? Go and check your son's rooms, cars, and belongings. So what if they get mad? You could be saving a life. Stop being complacent and go back to being an old school parent and not a new age friend to your child. And when I printed this last night, it just started, it was from Sunday, it had 1.8 thousand likes and 339 comments, and they were almost all positive for this lady who wrote this. And what I'm trying to say is, there's an organization called New Mexico Youth Challenge that I think that, you know, when I was growing up, they would scare us, even if you just got little minor things about possibly going to Springer. Springer was a boys' school, northern New Mexico. Springer's not open anymore. And I'm not saying that New Mexico Youth Challenge is a replacement, but I'm saying that I think if a child doesn't, you know, keeps messing around, I think the judge is going to say either you're going to either shape up or we're going to send you to the New Mexico Youth Challenge, and they'll learn discipline, respect, and a few other things. And so I think we have to start doing this. And so to answer to your question, and it's not the mayor's fault. This is indicative of what you're seeing. Things are starting to, just like it is probably in a lot of places here in New Mexico. It could be better.
So following up on that, our Southern New Mexico correspondent Algernon Damasa had a question on youth guns, on youth access to guns. Your position mostly centers on parents taking responsibility for gun access in the homes. In your own city and elsewhere, police are reporting that youths are trading guns through social media channels and then taking guns home. How will your administration work with law enforcement to deal with online weapons trafficking? And how will you work with other agencies for greater outreach and services for youth to turn them away from gang-style crime and gun culture?
Yeah. So one of the things that I talk about on my website is I want an auxiliary police department under the state police called the Metro Police to help out our local law enforcement agencies. Because, in fact, I was just talking with a lady last night. She's talking about how she lives near Pat Hurley Park and how at night there's a lot of people who gather. And she's called the police many times, and they just don't have the manpower to go there. And this is what what my division of the state police would do, would be able to help augment. We're not here to take over police departments. We're here to help with whether it's staking out a particular area and things of this nature. But one of the things I want to do, and I'm sure you've seen adults that look like children, right? And so I want to have some undercover adult police officers who look like kids infiltrate some of these parties, some of these places around the state, and be able to provide that intel to be able to be more proactive and stop these things before they actually happen. I think we could see this and being able to, you know, find out exactly where these parties are, what they're doing, who the person's in charge and doing these other things that we need to put a stop to.
We have a follow-up question from an audience member who asks, where do you draw the line between responsible gun regulation and protecting individual rights, especially with what's been proposed here in New Mexico?
I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment, and I don't want to put any infringements on that. I really believe that, you know, the parents have that certain responsibility, no different than when you lend your car out to your child. If they hurt somebody, the parents are going to be held responsible for it. I mean, they're going to probably get sued. And I think something has to happen if those children somehow get a hold of a gun. I mean, granted, you may not be able to know everything, but you have to at least help our community, help law enforcement, be that eyes and ears, just like this lady said in her response here. It's important to be able to, we can't be everywhere. The state, the local governments can't be everywhere. They have to have help from the parents.
Turning to another question from Algernon, you have some transportation and mobility proposals for working New Mexicans that include rail runner passes and e-bike rebates. What about rural parts of New Mexico and cities that are long distances from one another in much of the state? Are there mass transit options you could campaign for connecting more of New Mexico to bus and train routes?
So you've probably seen where these large buses only have a handful of riders. And you wonder, why can't you have it smaller? Now, you know, I've been away from local government for a couple years. I doubt if it's changed. But the reason why you can't see these smaller buses or smaller vans is because the federal government, when they give their money, because usually bus systems are subsidized by the local government by almost 90%. Okay, and they get monies from the federal government, and they want large buses. They don't want smaller vans. So what I'm proposing as governor is to have, much like an Uber system, smaller vehicles to help our residents who need that ability, because we can save a lot more money this way than trying to buy a larger van or whatever it may be the case, because they still may not be riding that. And so that's something there that I think it's important, because we recognize that in order to have a good job, you have to be able to get there. And not everybody has access to a vehicle.
Just a note that you can ask questions on either side, the QR codes, if you want to ask a question. And then also back here, Lucas Pierman has cards. So if you don't have a phone or if you don't want to type things out, you can also just go back and write down a question for Lucas, and he'll give it to us as well. We don't do those, sorry. So the next question actually comes from an audience member, Emily Howard. In a recent poll conducted by the Economic Forum, 94% of the Albuquerque area residents said local economic growth was important to them. What is your vision for a prosperous economic future for New Mexico, and how will you lead us there?
So New Mexico's economic growth is based on oil and gas primarily, and government. and recognize, that is what it is. I'm not here to try to shut down oil and gas, but I would like to see us start moving a little bit towards tourism. If you look at the state of Florida, they have Disney World. They have they have the beach, they have a lot of things that cause a lot of people to want to visit that state. We have a couple things. We have the Camino Real Trail, and we have the Route 66. And if we could somehow merge that so that we get it to the point where, and we have some really great places in the reservations, if we could somehow get it to that level, I don't know if we can get Disney to help us, but we can get to the point where, imagine if you want to, and we have a lot of history in New Mexico, imagine if you could stay on a trail that was used by umpteen years ago, even a couple hundred years ago, 150 years ago. I'm often one of my favorite shows is The Rifleman. I don't know if you remember that. And it took place in New Mexico. And they've even and imagine how it was way back then. And if we could replicate that, that would be so much fun to be able to spend and do it safely on these trails in these areas, and be able to see where many of our forefathers lived and foremothers lived. And so tourism is important. Also, we need to, when it comes to taxes, I looked up when it comes to Social Security. So Texas doesn't they don't have property tax, but they do tax Social Security. I think 2.5%. No, they don't tax Social Security, but some of the states, our neighbor states, charge the state income tax is 2.5%. Our highest is 5.9%. What I'm trying to get at is, I think I want to remove the taxes off of Social Security, because right now it's taxed to 150,000 is not taxed, I'm sorry, and anything over 150,000 is taxed. Think about if there are families that maybe make 175,000, maybe 200,000, whatever may be the case, they're going to look at Arizona, they're going to look at Texas, they're going to maybe look at Colorado and think, well, these guys don't tax Social Security, but New Mexico does. So we have to level the playing field, and so I think it's important that our tax structure has to be such that encourages retirees to move here, because that's clean industry. Imagine if you had, I'll never forget the impact that Fort Bliss had when they brought in a whole different brigade, almost 50 or 60,000 people. It changed El Paso, totally changed it. And they didn't have to have jobs, they already had a job. They were military. And that's, in a way, when you have retirees bringing all their money here to New Mexico, it could literally change New Mexico overnight. Now, I'm not saying we want to do that overnight, because we want to grow, it's like any business. We want to continue to grow, but not at the anemic rate that New Mexico is growing right now.
I have a couple of questions here about data centers. So data centers are expanding in and close to New Mexico, including your home county, obviously Project Jupiter. Do you believe the promises of employment and economic development that back these projects, and will you work with state agencies to hold data center developers accountable for emissions and water consumption?
I would like to hold them accountable. I want to say this, though. One day when I was getting ready to retire from the city, I was trying to figure out how many city council meetings, county commission meetings I've attended, and it was in thousands, right? And I think about this. When we had a great proposal, they spent their time sharing it with the public because they were proud of it. They wanted to explain how exactly it's going to work, how it was going to be beneficial to the communities, how it was going to be beneficial to the environment, whatever may be the case. Well, when you have an organization that likes to run it very, very fast, to me, that tells me there's something wrong here, and I don't like that. And so this is where my experience will show versus my other. I'm not knocking my other candidates' background. They all have extremely high positions, but I dealt with counties for 8 years and cities for 22 years, and when you think about it, what your state rep and your state senator does is they're the go-between between cities and counties and the state government and getting them money and figuring out how we're going to make our cities and counties work. I know how to do that. And I know that when someone runs something that fast through, there's something there that I don't like. That's all I'm going to say on data centers.
Following up on that, Roger asks, water, what about water? Chili fields, the Rio Grande data centers?
Okay, so I don't have a gift card with me, but if I did, imagine I had a gift, okay, I have my card here, but let's say if I was to ask you, the audience members, what was the name of Truth or Consequences before it became Truth or Consequences? Hot Springs. So JC, we owe him a gift card. So Hot Springs, so there was a study done at New Mexico State University. In fact, the actual professor, Dr. Larova, has reached out to me and is going to share with me this data. And I know there's a company that is investing $1 billion in geothermal power. So when I was in grad school, one of the projects was to come up with a environmentally friendly project. Now, keep in mind, and I never shared this with you, but I was a guest of Saudi government back in the early 2012. And I saw their water desalinization plant. It was one of the largest in the Middle East. And the most expensive part of running a desalinization plant is the power to run it. It takes 60% of the, if it was a business, 60% of it is used to run it 24/7, 365. Anyway, so this study that New Mexico State University has done is there's a lot of hot and salty water on the west part of the state near Truth or Consequences, actually a little bit more west of that. It's about a mile to a mile and a half down, 378 degrees. And so what I did is I said, what if we build a geothermal power unit that runs the desalinization plant? So so we go there, we capture the steam, it runs the plant, and it's self-sufficient. There's been estimates that right now there's 300 square miles of surface water. That's what a lot of our farmers use. And, but there's been discussion that there could be almost 30 to 40,000 square miles of water that's been trapped there for centuries. It's just hot and salty. And so this is the water that I want to use. And this is something here that we bring back life to our communities.
Good. Right.
Back to economic development, you mentioned tourism and changing tax structure for retirees. What are other industries that you think could move the needle in terms of the state's economic development?
Aerospace. So we've got, of course, our labs, we've got our military bases, and there's what they call land uses with the federal government. So, for example, I was trying to help New Mexico State University have a campus on the White Sands Missile Range. And what the plan was, excuse me, was for those engineers that are in school, we hire them as a GS1, okay? And then usually as a junior, and then as a senior, maybe as a GS2, and then if they go to grad school, GS3. The reason for that is we've got them. They've got a job, they'll get their clearance, and they can move right in there working at White Sands Missile Range, whether it's here, whether it's Kirtland Air Force Base, Holloman. We got to utilize our universities, and we need to utilize what the federal government gives us, it's called the land use mechanism that they've provided for these types of things. And so we can start with engineers. That way we don't have to lose them. You know, I'm fortunate that two of my kids are engineers, and they've both been able to have, well, one has a job here in Albuquerque and one at White Sands Missile Range.
I love the reference to the Rifleman and Chuck Norris and Lucas McCain. Today in the fictional Norfolk, they'd probably have a recreational cannabis dispensary. So I'm just curious, 5 years after the Cannabis Regulation Act, has it been a success in southern New Mexico and Las Cruces?
There's quite a few of them. If I went as elected governor, what I would do is just probably put a little bit more different regulation on them, because they're just all over. I've seen some places that, if I have to give them credit, they've taken some very dilapidated buildings and turned them into some really nice buildings. Unfortunately, they didn't last, because there was other places that maybe weren't as good, as nice, that probably were selling the product cheaper. And unfortunately, these really nice places went under. So I do know that the city of Las Cruces has raised quite a bit of money from the cannabis, and they're kind of at a standstill of what to use that for. And depending on the questions later, I'll share with you what I was planning on using that for. That plus the opioid money.
Do you have concerns that cannabis is getting into the hands and the youngsters in Las Cruces?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there were times where some of my colleagues, and fortunately we had some people come out, but it barely passed on a 4-3 vote, where there were some places that were within 100 feet of schools, which, that you just can't have that. I mean, it's not that, I just want to make sure that our children have an opportunity to grow up and get a good education and have a good start. And I just didn't, that's one of the biggest concerns that I had. And I think this letter that I read shares some of the concerns that parents would have. And so it's just, I can't imagine being a kid growing up today as opposed to what it was when I was growing up.
Well, talking about the opioid crisis, Chuck Holman asks, what are your ideas about ending homelessness in New Mexico?
Okay, so let me break this down into 4 parts. I think the first part is those who have just lost their job and they have just been booted out of their place where they live. We need to get with them very, very fast, okay? There's a second group that I believe just wants to live off the grid, and that's okay. We just can't have them living where they want to live, in parks, on the sidewalks. The Supreme Court said as long as you give them, I'll paraphrase this, as long as you give them the same or better living conditions, it's okay to move them. So we need to partner with our cities and counties to be able to give them a place to live. And it's going to be, and I often think of in Las Cruces, it's called a community of hope. And it's been recognized when the HUD administrator would come down, she would always like to visit. She'd say, Ken, this is really the model of homelessness, because we had Camp Hope there. But anyway, so that's the second one, is those who want to live off the grid. The third one is people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol. And that's going to be a little bit tougher sell. And then the fourth one is those that have mental health conditions. Those are the ones that we can't just continue to stop them and then put them back on the street. We have to find a way, and I do have a way, we have to be able to house them. And let me tell you how I would house them. So in Las Cruces, there's a company called Alaska Structures. Alaska Structures worked during the Iran-Afghanistan war. They could build these tents that were literally, when the U.S. military went to the Middle East, within days, they had like a whole building ready to go. And it was a tent. And I was inside there. Is that me making this noise, or? I'm sorry if it's me. But what I'm trying to get at is we have to have something to be able to have a place for those with the mental illness, because we can't just keep letting them back on the street, because they're either going to hurt themselves or they're going to hurt others. And there was, unfortunately, there was a police officer in Las Cruces who was killed by someone who had that mental health. So we can't do this. And so this is where I want to bring in cities and counties, because I know that not only do they get cannabis money, not only do they have opioid money, but they also have what they call an indigent fund. And I've checked this with a few other departments, with other counties. When the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, was passed, that tax still kept going. So they're using it. And this is the neat thing with counties that we can do that we can't do with cities. Counties are considered political subdivisions of the state, meaning the state can say, listen, and they will do this, listen, you need to build another detention center, or you need to house the district court, and we're not going to pay for it. You just got to figure it out. And so I'm going to take that indigent money, and we're going to use this so that we can have places around the state to help with those who need mental health services.
Conversely, the other opposite of homelessness is affordable housing, or not the opposite, but the complementary piece of it. Elena Gonzalez in the audience asks, what is your vision to address affordable homeownership opportunities statewide? Okay, so there are six medium security prisons around New Mexico. And of course, there's higher maximum, but I'm just talking medium. So I'm looking at prisoners who are in the system, who might have been sentenced nonviolent. I don't want any murderers, I don't want any rapists, I don't want anyone who did anything bad with children. I'm talking about people who were felons because maybe they embezzled money, maybe they did some drug offenses, things that they didn't harm anybody, okay? So let's say you take inmate A, Joe, inmate Joe, and Joe was sentenced to 5 years, and he's been a model prisoner for 3 years. And the staff at the facility says, you know what, Joe would make a great person for this if he chooses to. So what I want to do is when they have 2 years left, or 3 years, I'm just using 2 as an example, I want to give them a chance to come out of the system, and we'll teach them a trade, like plumbing, electrical, HVAC, concrete, things that it takes to build a house. And of course, they won't be going back to the jail, they'll be staying in a halfway house. And I've already talked with some contractors. So the contractors, all they told me, they said, this would be a great public-private partnership. So let's say, for example, we provide the labor, because, as it is, prisoners, they don't get paid that much. They may get 25 cents an hour, they may get 50 cents an hour. But I think a prisoner would rather be outside learning the trade, because when they get finished with their 2-year sentence, they're going to have a job, and then they're going to get paid whatever they should be getting paid. And then as long as they complete the remaining, say, 3 years, I'll expunge their record and take that felony label off of them. Now, by doing this, we can reduce the price of homes by 25%, because there's 2 factors that go into to build a home: cost of material, cost of labor. And if we can bring that labor cost considerably down, we can now be able to build housing a lot cheaper. And when we can be able to provide this, and I want to use this as incentives to be able to do lateral transfers. When I say lateral transfers is,
most police departments and even sheriff's departments are finding it's hard to fill their ranks. That's why a lot of them they don't, they're at 80% capacity, maybe 90. But by being able to say, hey, JC here, he's a police officer in Colorado, and he wants to move to Albuquerque. We can provide him a brand new 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage with 0 down payment and about $1,500 a month. Now, we're not going to be giving it to them. They're going to be paying us. And this is where I want to use that general fund that we have to invest in New Mexicans, to be able to invest in New Mexico so that you can have affordable housing. And we have different phases that I want to do. First phase would be public safety, including plus licensed medical personnel, teachers, and then members of an enrolled tribe. That would be phase 1, and then we move to different phases so that they can also have access to homes. When we start putting in housing, that's going to add to the market. That's going to cause the rents to start coming down.
And this is my own question, a related question. John Lewis, who I went with him to Selma, he was a former member of Congress who was a big civil rights activist, and he used to do these pilgrimages to Selma every year and talk to people about what it was like to cross the bridge and to fight for civil rights. And he also did pilgrimages, I think it's a little less publicized, to California to talk about Japanese internment and Chinese exclusion laws. I believe your father was in a camp in Japanese internment during World War II. Looking at that history, what do you think about some of the prisons for undocumented people in southern New Mexico?
Yeah, that's terrible. I think we missed a great opportunity. If I was in the federal government and I had ear of the administration, I would say, you know what, Mr. President, this would be a great opportunity. First off, if they've committed a felony, they need to leave the country, okay? But what you're doing right now, if you can at least figure out where they're at, give them a special ID number that they can go back to work and pay taxes and contribute to a fund that they probably never will ever access, it'll keep the cost of goods and services down. Because when you remove them from the economy, the employer is going to have to bring in some other people, and sometimes they're not going to want to work for a small amount, and they're going to say, okay, I'll do it for maybe 50% more. So now, of course, they're going to have to raise the prices of everything, and then that's going to cause inflation to go up. So, and what I'm trying to get now, if they do want to become a U.S. citizen, they have a 5-year back of the line penalty. What we don't want is someone to come here and then be able to find their way to become a U.S. citizen quicker. That's not fair, because there's a lot of people right now that have been waiting, doing the right thing to try to get to that promised land on that side of it and become a United States citizen. And so I put that out there. C-SPAN ran it one time, and they took it off because I don't think they wanted to hear that. This was what I thought was a good solution. NPR ran it, which was good, and so that's what I would do.
So what would your administration's strategy be for working with the Trump administration and the federal government on immigration and other issues?
So during Trump 1.0, they would send people to Las Cruces at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, drop them off at a bus station. We'd get reports that a bunch of people have just been dropped off, they can't speak English, and they don't know what to do. So we worked with them and worked with the Homeland Security to at least give us a 6 to 7 hour head start lead time, and we got things worked out. Getting back to that Telshore Fund, when they would bring these immigrants to us, we would do what we needed to do. A lot of them, they just wanted to go back to Houston, New York. They wanted to go to bigger cities. They didn't want to stay in Las Cruces. And then we'd send them on their way. I would use that money from the Telshore Fund because it was totally unencumbered. We had $40 million. We probably spent $6 or $7 million, and then eventually we got reimbursed by the state. So what I'm trying to get at, by the federal government, what I'm trying to get at is I would do the same thing. I know this administration has signaled that they want to take away certain things that are not, theoretically, that they're not supposed to do because there's laws prohibiting it. But you know what? We'll roll with it, and then when the new administration comes in, we'll get reimbursed.
Would you seek to repeal the Immigrant Friendly Act that the legislature passed this year?
I'm sorry, sir. Can
Would you seek to repeal the Immigrant Friendly Act, I believe it was called, that the legislature passed this year, preventing counties from contracting with ICE?
Yeah, I don't believe in that. You know, when I was county commissioner, we would rent out the detention center to the feds, and they would provide the funding of about 30 to 40% of the beds. I mean, when you do that, there's a lot of communities like in Carrizozo. I was visiting the Mescalero Apache, and that Carrizozo's right there, and they have a detention center. You take that away, that's their only job.
You would seek to repeal the law that passed?
Oh, seek repeal. I keep hearing appeal.
Immigrant Protection Act, I think it was called.
Yeah, no, I would, yes, I would try to undo that.
You would?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Turning to healthcare, Karen Alterman asks, if you are elected governor of New Mexico, what are some of the things you would focus on to make healthcare better for the people?
Okay, so this administration has signaled that they want to take away, first, just to give you an example. The federal government, okay, the state's budget is about $11 billion, but then we also get another good chunk of money, about another $10 billion for healthcare. They signaled that, so really the budget's like 22 to 23 billion. They've signaled that they want to take that 10 billion, maybe get it down to 8. So that means $2 billion that we're going to lose. We have to figure that out. So if you've never heard of a organization, well, it's a label called FQHC, Federally Qualified Healthcare Facility. Each county has one. I don't know the name here in Bernalillo, but in Las Cruces, for those of you, I know you've been in Las Cruces, it's La Clínica de Familia and Ben Archer. Those are HQFCs. And so basically, they have doctors there, they have dentists there, and so what I'm trying to do is we want to make sure that we'll put more emphasis on that, but more importantly, what we'll do is we'll do one-time purchases of imaging equipment and x-ray equipment. Because right now what they do is they farm it out to the hospitals or the imaging center, and yeah, they get a discount. But we're going to have to try to save money. And so we're going to buy these one time with our permanent fund, and then that way there we're going to save money in the interim. There's also an organization called the New Mexico Alliance on Healthcare that does a fantastic job there in every county also. And one of the things that we want to focus on, this is for the rural parts of the state, is going to be some mobile vehicles that they can go out there and do screening, blood screening, eye exams, and some small work that a lot of times that's what they need to check their blood pressure, maybe take a blood test, things of this nature. So that's going to be the biggest challenge. Now this one here is where I think we can save about $100 million. So right now, there was a bill that was passed, and it was good. It was limiting medical malpractice on punitive damages. So just to let you know this, doctors have insurance called medical malpractice insurance. So if the doctor does something wrong, they'll cover it. But sometimes the court says, hey, you know what? Yeah, what you did was wrong, but we're also going to add some punitive damages to you. Even though this was the first time, and even though you didn't do it on purpose, once you get hit with punitive, that insurance doesn't cover those punitive damages. And so what I'm trying to get at is, you've seen these different affiliates around the state, if you haven't already. Like, for example, maybe your own personal doctor. When you go to their doctor's office, you're going to say, oh, wow, they're associated with Loveless or Presbyterian or maybe University of New Mexico. Well, if we make them an affiliate of the University of New Mexico, and I want to be very careful what I'm going to tell you on this, I'm not suggesting that the state take it over. I'm just saying we want to do an affiliation, because once they become affiliated with the University of New Mexico, which is basically a state hospital, now it goes from being sued from punitive to now tort. That's a huge difference. That means that they can only sue for like $1.2 million. That'll save these hospitals, which we can't get data on it, but I'm going to guess it's probably in the neighborhood of, when you take all the hospitals in New Mexico, their revenues are probably $5 billion to $6 billion. And if you take the cost of medical malpractice insurance premiums for this type of industry, you can, I'm going to guess it probably represents 2% on their balance sheet. So 2% of 5 billion is 100 million that we can use for doctor recruitment and be able to bring other doctors here, because now we'll have money to pay them. We can also do a few other things like remove gross receipts tax off some of the services of general practitioners and such. I can go on and on, you know, so I'm sorry if I talk too much.
No, that's great. You're running for governor, exactly.
So I'm trying to do it, I'm trying to tell you real fast, right? I'm trying to explain everything. Going back to those data centers, they just try to rush it through. You know, this is like me saying, hey, listen, I'm running for governor, just vote for me, and I'm gone, right? We don't even know what you stand for. That's exactly why we need to make sure when these, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on a tangent, but anyways, go ahead.
No, that's all right. Along those lines, Algernon DeMassa asks that the governor signed HB 99 into law with caps on medical malpractice claims, aiming to bring insurance premiums down for physicians. In your analysis, does that legislation do enough? And what are the next steps your administration would take to ease healthcare access for New Mexicans and encourage physicians and specialists to locate here and stay?
It's a good start. It really is. But there's one thing that we need to also look at. It's called venue shopping. Okay, so let's say, for example, somebody gets hurt in Artesia, okay? And it's legitimate, but the lawyer knows someone in another part of the state. I'm just going to say a northern part of the state. I'm not going to say which city because I don't want them to be mad, but an area that might be known to be a little bit more friendlier towards litigation. And so they connect with this lawyer in another part of the state, a northern part of the state, and now the judge can hear it up there. And they have typically been known to maybe pay twice as much, maybe 3 times as much than they would if they had done it in Artesia. That's called venue shopping. That's the next step we have to stop, because that's how they get higher payouts. Don't get me wrong, I mean, lawyers have to make money, but if you ever see all these billboards around town, they're all lawyers. They're all lawyers, and they're personal injury. And so, granted, that's how they make their money, but they have to pass the cost on, and that's why you see it just continually increasing. So venue shopping is one, removing GRT is another. I'm sorry, the other one is Medicare reimbursement. I'll give you an example. So I live in Las Cruces. I'm 50 minutes away from El Paso, Texas. El Paso is a great city, by the way. But if you go to El Paso and you use Medicare, those doctors get a higher reimbursement than they do in Las Cruces. That's not fair. So if you're setting up shop, you're going to say, I'll just go to El Paso, who has no personal income tax, although they do have really high property tax. But you know, they're going to lay out the land here, and so they're going to probably say, I'll make more money here, and I'll just go, you know, come to Las Cruces, or whatever may be the case. So these are the things that we have to figure out what doctors are looking at. Also, when it comes to loan forgiveness for their loans to go to medical school. Right now, New Mexico's at $75,000, and Texas is at, I think, $250,000. So right outside of Las Cruces is a community called Anthony. There's an Anthony, New Mexico, and Anthony, Texas. And literally, the line runs right between the two cities. It's like, I wouldn't say night and day, but Anthony, Texas has a lot more business than Anthony, New Mexico. So I was talking with a student at Burrell Medical School there in Las Cruces, and she says, Ken, I'm from Anthony, New Mexico. If I start my clinic in Anthony, Texas, I will get reimbursed $250,000, whereas if I stay in Anthony, New Mexico, I only get $75,000. Well, that's not easy that's real easy to understand that she's going to open up in Texas. And this is why we need to be able to have parity with our surrounding states.
Just to change the topic just a little bit, how do you feel about building an outdoor stadium for New Mexico United and an indoor arena for an NBA team here in Albuquerque? So I saw this in El Paso when they built the stadium for the Chihuahuas.
Okay, at first, it's almost exactly like this is. The mistake that they had is they didn't take into account those people who live around there and recognizing it's going to raise their property taxes. And so I guess what I would venture to say is we probably, to make sure that those who live in that area, because it will increase the value of your home, is we could freeze that tax so you don't have to pay more. So that you will benefit because it's gone up, but you won't have to benefit through higher taxes because it did bring a lot of revenue to that area. Now, what was smart about it is they got Southwest University to name the stadium, so that really relieved a lot of money to have to come up with that total amount. Now, whether or not you need 200 million, I don't know. That seems like an awful lot of money. But in today's world, who knows? Things have just gotten so expensive. But I couldn't tell you. But I do know that it will breathe a lot of new dollars and a lot of more excitement. But I haven't seen the full plan.
Is aiming for an NBA team too high?
An NBA, I thought it was
NBA
for
franchise.
I thought it was
if
for
we
the
built a
soccer,
stadium.
so
Well, New Mexico United wants a stadium, an outdoor stadium, and they proposed private money for that. But there's also been a proposal to build something at the fairgrounds that the governor's looking at.
I will say,
Any ideas on that?
so I will say this. I know Secretary Buttigieg, we sat on the mayor's conferences places, and I know that he's from South Bend, Indiana, and I often wonder about Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I would ask him about that. This is a town that probably is no bigger, it's a lot smaller than Las Cruces, but could somehow have a major franchise like that. In fact, one of my colleagues that used to work for me, he knew someone that was going through a divorce, and he pleaded with the judge. He said, "Judge, I'll give my ex-wife everything, but please let me keep my Green Bay Packer tickets." It was that valuable because the wait line is like something like 25 years just to be able to, how they did that, I don't know. So what I'm trying to say is, I couldn't tell you, but if Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is a smaller city than Albuquerque, can have a NFL franchise, I don't know about the NBA. I think that, I couldn't tell you. I mean, my thought is that the NBA is losing a little bit of its luster. That they're seeking to go other places, but I don't know.
Well, just following up on that, audience member Shelley Barker asks, please share your thoughts about the State Fair renovation. What would you like to see happen there?
Isn't that where the stadium?
That's where the stadium is supposed to go.
Yeah, so I was there. I just went there, I visited this past weekend. Well, I've been there a few places. I recognize the proximity where it's at. There's something in real estate called highest and best use. So I haven't had a chance to really analyze it and see where that land is put to its best use, where it stays as is, where you build some type of housing. Now, I've shared this with Mayor Keller, because he'd come down to Las Cruces and see our Camp Hope. And the difference is, and I told him, I had suggested, was that when you have housing for the homeless, you have to have people there to be there to help them 24/7, because you can't just give them a house and let them think that that's what they want. And I'm afraid that if you turn that into housing, just pure housing with no one to provide the services, that's going to be tough. That's why right before I left the city, there's a great organization in San Diego that would build, basically, if I could just sum it up, it's kind of like an apartment complex with people who live there, that there are their therapists, their mental health people that work with them, and they live there on premises on that campus, and that's where they get their help. That's where I think we need to, that's what I would recommend, and this is where I want to provide to our cities and counties. I'm not here to try to tell them what to do. I'm here to be a resource for them, to explain to them, this is what we did. I mean, after all, we were the best run city in the state, okay? And top 10 in the nation. We know a thing or two about running a city and a county. And we can just share with them what our best practices have done and how it could work. And I can share with them, just like a parent shares with their child, if you do this, there's a good chance it's not going to work.
But getting back to what you said, one of your focuses for economic development is on tourism and really leaning into that and attracting people from all over the country and world to visit New Mexico. Does that require the state to sort of think bigger about attractions and nice things and what you're going to do to really attract people to want to vacation and spend their money here?
Do I think it's going to... I'm sorry.
Well, like when we're talking about the fairgrounds and what to do with it, like, is that an opportunity for New Mexico to sort of think bigger than what it traditionally has? I think that's kind of what Jeff was getting to you, and I think that might tie into what you said about really leaning in on tourism.
Yeah, we have to think big. For so many years we've just, this is just the way we do it. You've heard that. This is the way we do it. Well, we have to go a little bit above. We have to think big to grow big. And so, that's just one component. Now, I do have something for our smaller cities, if you'd like for me to share with you my thought on economic development for that. So, there's a city that I visit from time to time. It's called Lordsburg. And it's about 2,000 people. And I have a good friend there, and he just tells me he's going to be there till he passes away. And so I got to thinking, if we could use this, and I call it a hybrid venture capitalist model, okay? So again, utilizing our permanent fund and investing in our people. So what I would do is, let's say you and Jeff are the two electrical contractors in Lordsburg. And I come to you and say, listen, we want to buy your business for about 2 years, and then we're going to sell it back to you at what we paid for it. And in those 2 years, and we're going to relax some procurement laws here, rules, and in those 2 years, we're going to give you all the contracts of the state in a region. We're going to give you the contracts for the schools and the counties. And you're going to hire in a certain demographic area the people who live there, and you're going to train them. And we're going to give you this much money because you're going to have a lot more business. And once it's running really good, we're going to have you buy it back from us. And now, whether it's going to be like a co-op, and now it's going to be running. You're going to have your contract. Maybe you're going to be doing business in Arizona. Maybe you're going to be doing business on the internet. I don't know, but we're going to jumpstart you. It's what we refer to as economic gardening. And then do this in other communities. Tucumcari could be another one. Deming could be another one. These are for smaller cities. Albuquerque doesn't need it. Las Cruces doesn't need it. Rio Rancho doesn't need it. But some of these smaller ones, they need it. And so I have different packages for different sized cities. And really it's just three. The larger ones, we don't need it. The really small ones like Deming, and then we have our medium size that we can do a little bit of a hybrid of such.
Annalisa Jacobson asks, what is your position on choice for women?
Oh, I'm pro-choice. I mean, I don't really like abortion, but I don't think it's the government's right to tell you what to do with your body.
And Ellen Horton asks, the Jeffrey Epstein case has put a spotlight in New Mexico and not in a good way. What support would you offer victims for getting to the bottom of what happened at Zorro Ranch?
Whatever we can do to help. I mean, this is a very traumatic situation, and one that we need any victim to know that we would put whatever resources we can of the state to help with that closure, to find out those who did what they did are brought to justice, and then whatever is needed to help them get over this very traumatic event.
Charles Reagan asks, do you see the need to wean New Mexico citizenry from being a welfare state, and if so, how?
So, let's take Doña Ana County, where Las Cruces is from. We're the second largest county, but we're one of the bottom as far as per capita income. And so that's not good. So what I'm trying to get at is, remember when I visited Saudi Arabia, one day when I went there, and I was there for about 10 days, and I asked the people that we were coordinating with, I saw a lot of Fortune 500 companies there. I said, how did you get all these big companies to move here? And they said, it was real simple. We promised to build their buildings in return for a long-term lease, and as long as they hired our people. And I thought, well, that's pretty novel. So that is what we can do. If and again, I refer to this 70 billion plus permanent fund that, by the way, it doesn't just sit there, okay? It's being invested by some very smart people at the State Investment Council. They try to get a return of 7%. They're not always successful. They do the very best they can. They get about maybe 6.5 to 6.85. So what I'm trying to get at is we can use that money to invest, build these areas, these buildings, and do what they do in the Middle East. And then they're going to basically bring jobs, high-paying jobs, that's going to put the per capita at a higher amount and lift people out of poverty. You know, it's very difficult. I was just asked this question the other day on Facebook about my stance on minimum wage. You know, I started when I was 15 years old because I kept bugging the district manager for Taco Bell to give me a job. And he says, you know, you got to be 16. And I was 15, and I got my parents to sign off. I worked really hard, and I got a little raise, even though the minimum wage at that time was $2.90. I got like a 10-cent raise. And what I'm trying to get at is, I think good businesses that are good and have their good employees pay more than a minimum wage. It's very hard, because unless you've been in that business's shoes, it's very hard for the government to say, you know what, you're going to pay so-and-so. Now, I could see if we give them money, but just like I don't want any of my employees in the state to make minimum, you know, to make something that's below minimum wage. That's just not right. But that's the public money. It's not private money. So there is a distinction there. And so getting back to, that's why I want to help uplift the business community so they can pay a lot better wage than minimum wage.
When it comes to the state using the permanent fund money for investments, do you think the state should be using the interest or the principal of those accounts?
Okay, well, let me use this as an example. Anyone who buys today, say a $250,000 house and takes out a 7% mortgage for 30 years, that house isn't $250, it's going to be $750. They're going to spend $500,000 in interest. Okay, so that's the plan that I'm trying to say is if we use the money and probably whether it's principal or interest, because if we can get 7% and the State Investment Council is getting 6.85% and we're putting this money to good use, whether it's through more affordable health care, but more importantly, housing and jobs, not only are we getting our 7% return, oh my goodness, we're putting New Mexicans to work, and they're getting paid good jobs, and they have a nice place to live. You haven't heard my phase 2, where we're talking about fourplexes for those that are New Mexicans who may not have a nest egg ready for retirement. We can use the same model and sell them a fourplex, and they'll be able to rent out the 3 units, live in one, rent out the 3, and probably still have a little bit of money left over. And when that thing gets paid, that's their retirement. You know, I'm looking ahead. I'm not just looking at what we need to take care of today. On one hand, I am, but I've been very pragmatic that I always want to look ahead. Plus, I teach personal finance at the university, and I know, I recognize this, I see this in my students, and my goal is to teach them about future value of a dollar, the present value of a dollar. You know, their biggest asset is their time. And sometimes, you know, our older citizens, they've been busy doing 2 or 3 jobs, trying to make ends meet for their kids, trying to do all the, you know, and they forgot to take care of themselves. And so we can accelerate that. And so getting back to your question, it's probably going to be principal too. But hey, our principal, if we're making more money than what the State Investment Council is, and now granted, and I'll refer to my state senators and state reps as my board of directors. If my board of directors tells me and says, hey, Ken, you know what? We don't have a problem in going to 6.5%. If we go to 6.5%, your payment's going to drop. Now, granted, we won't have as much money, but we have quite a bit of money there. But it's investing in New Mexicans. It's not just sitting there. And right now, and you guys, I have to give you credit. I'm not just buttering up to you. You guys are you are the best newspaper, right? And you guys had a great article on where some of this money goes. And there are some organizations that get paid a lot of money to manage real estate for the state. We can do that. And that money could be used for some other things, but, I got to get there first.
Renee Robinson asks, if you're elected governor, what is your plan to make inroads in education?
So when I was growing up, I had a great education. I had great teachers, and I remember we used to take this test, and it wasn't that long. It probably took us an hour to do this test, and it measured a few key indicators: our ability to compose or read some sentences, some math questions, and some arithmetic. And I think I know it was reading and arithmetic. I know that because I'd be, say, in 5th grade, and we'd get the results back, and it says Kenneth is reading at a 8th grade level or something like that. And so, of course, I'd take it home to show my parents, and it was good. And I don't know where things changed. I don't know if it was because they've eliminated the State Board of Education. I don't know what's changed. But I know that a lot of times teachers and kids are just focused on this one national exam or this one particular exam, and things seem to have changed a lot. I just saw where there are certain schools and their reading proficiency is terrible. The math isn't that great. We need to go back to the basics. I don't know what happened. But not only do we need to go back to the basics, we need to also put in more trades, whether it's an automotive used to be big in high school. We need to go back to that. We need to go to plumbing, electrical, HVAC. We need to teach them a trade because not everyone's going to go to college. And then the other thing is we need to be able to make it a little bit easier. We recognize that sometimes kids can't always go to school, but they still want to learn. And if they want to learn, whether they're at their house or they want to learn, whether at the park, whatever it may be the case, the bottom line is, as long as they get an education, that they can take care of themselves is the goal. And so education is going to be huge for me. I had a program when I was mayor and started in 2008 and it stopped in COVID in 2020. And it was called the Mayor's Education Award. And all I did is I wanted these kids to know how important they are to us. They're our future leaders. And then I had them all promise me that they were going to graduate from high school. My goal, and we started in 2008, and they were 3rd graders. My goal in 2018 was to have the highest graduation rate in the state, and we did. And I'm not saying that it was just because of that. There are some other good programs out there. But what I'm trying to get at is the kids knew that I cared about them. We estimated that we met 22,000 3rd graders, and we took pictures with them, and we actually, I signed my name, but my assistant would actually put their name on there. And, we had a way to do it. It was really good. And we would hand it out to them. And it was something there, even to this day, they still remember that. And it's important that the kids know how important that they are to us and our future of New Mexico, and how important they are and why it's important that they get a good education. And so I will call on mayors around the state to resurrect this program. In fact, it was ranked number 2 in the country at a mayor's award, and we won that. And Senator Udall and Senator Bingaman helped get that into the Library of Congress. That the way we do it, and I can still remember it, but I don't know if we're pressed for time. But anyways, it's good. Education is important.
Well, and on that note, how important do you think standardized tests are in tracking how schools are improving and providing a quality education to kids?
So I think that's what we're talking about. That's the one that everyone worries about. And I think that we need to just, I don't want them to study just to do good on a test, even though they may not know what they're doing. We need to make sure that they understand, how to read and how to write and how to compute. And granted, AI has changed some things. Computers have changed some things. I still remember I was in 3rd or 4th grade. My dad had bought this really cool looking calculator, and I told him I wanted to use this for my math. He says, no, you can't use that for your math. You can use it to check your numbers, but you're still going to have to learn your how to compute your numbers on your own. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is we need to really focus a lot on early childhood development. We need to help our young adults, let them know, really, this is some of the things that worked for other parents growing up with their kids. and kind of go back to some of the things that really worked, because I don't think it's working right now.
Michael Ayan asks, in your tenure as mayor of Las Cruces, why did you try to take Moongate Water Company under eminent domain?
Okay, so the city of Las Cruces has 2 bolsons. The Mesilla bolson, which is rechargeable. Okay, that means so when it rains, it recharges. And then the Jornada bolson, which is not rechargeable. The Jornada bolson had, at that time, a 25-year life, which means that if somebody put some type of poisoning or did something bad to our water system, we could shut off the Mesilla bolson or the water that we were extracting from it, shut it off, and turn on our Jornada bolson. Well, there was a company that we found out was using our Jornada bolson, and they weren't supposed to. And we said, quit doing that. They didn't have to stop this. And we got a little bit more tougher on them, to the point where we're just going to have to do what we need to do to protect our water source. That's it.
We had a re-ask of one question about homelessness. Andrew Sandoval asks again, what is your approach to homelessness, which has been a huge problem throughout the state?
Andrew Sandoval asked that question? I wonder if it's Andrew Sandoval.
Oh, Andrew Sandoval?
It depends. It's possible, but that's okay. So depending on which, I have some different things, in detail. And again, I want to go back to my website. So years ago, I realized, and I didn't know this, and forgive my vague, but one day I had to take a Series 26 exam in, I forgot what city, it was outside of New Mexico. And there was a hotel right near it. So I thought, okay, I'd just stay here. And I remember telling my wife, I said, I think people live here at this hotel. Because I went to the front desk and I saw a lot of them with some frozen dinners and such. And they were using it to heat up their food. And then in the morning, you could see cars, picking up some people and stuff like that. And, I just stayed there one day and I took off. And I never forgot that. And so I delved in it to a lot more. And I found out there are people, and again, forgive me for not knowing this, but there are people who live in their car that have jobs. Then they go clean up maybe at a gym or maybe at a particular area, and they have everything in the car. So what I'm trying to get at is getting back to the permanent fund for homelessness. For those who live in a car, we could actually have a trailer that we could sell them. See, the government can't just give it to you, but we can sell it to you, and we can sell it at cost. And I have to represent 7%. See, because I've got the Attorney General, I got to make sure he knows that we're not violating the anti-donation clause. We have to have certain stipulations for it to be legal. So we could buy it, sell it, a motor home that's better than a car for, say, $15,000, $20,000, and you can make a payment of a couple $100, which you probably spend by having your gym membership or going whatever. I don't know what may be the case. And so I have different levels. And then those who live in the hotel, getting back to that example that I used on housing, we can build a condominium unit that you could actually own a condominium unit and be paying less than you will, because those hotels, I understand, can charge anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200 a month. And you might be thinking, well, why don't they just have an apartment? Because they can't come up with the deposits that are needed. So there's a whole lot of different things. So my background that I teach is finance, insurance, and real estate. And so there's a lot of different things that we can work with different partners throughout the state to be able to help make a huge dent in homelessness.
Mary Lee Donovan asks, of state government departments, which would you give the most attention to, and which, if any, would you change extensively?
Well, I've still been waiting for the CYFD question.
I was going to ask that next.
Okay, well, let me add these two together. It's so much that I decided to write it down, okay? So CYFD, these are some of the 7 top things that they deal with. Child abuse and neglect investigations, foster care and child placement, family support, the juvenile justice system, behavioral health services for youth, early childhood programs, and adoption services. So I also found out the 3 areas that have caused the most grief and the problems. and it's cost them a lot of money. So keep in mind, CYFD spends $10 million a year. $5 million is for lawsuits, this was last year, and $5 million basically to run their operations. So I think there was one year they had 7 deaths, and they came from 3 primary areas. Those that are placed in custody, and this was an one of the things, is there was a suicide or harm while in foster homes. Number 2, reunified, meaning return to an unsafe home or neglect. And then the third one was what was known to CYFD, so it says warning signs that lead to a fatal outcome. So I found out that the average foster parent, and it's on a scale, but on the average is $700 per child, okay? So let's go back to the return to unsafe home neglect or placed in custody. What I'm trying to get at is, if we increased the amount of reimbursement to the foster families, we can, instead of it being 700, maybe even if we doubled it, we can have a little bit more control of where they're going to be. Okay? And that's a drop in the bucket. I take that $5 million that they spent in a lawsuit and divide that by this 700, that's 3,300 more, whether it's 3,300 more parents or 3,300 factor that we can play with, whether we need to increase the reimbursement or be able to have a more safer and secure place. So what I'm trying to get at is CYFD is the area that needs the most help. And it's an area that when you extract these, because you don't really hear problems from adoption services, you don't really hear a whole lot from the early childhood program. I mean, you do hear about it, but I mean, you don't hear about fatalities in those particular areas. You hear it on these 3, and this is the focus, and this is where it needs to be. And so I would probably split this up because it's a lot. And so maybe we have one secretary that's in charge of this, and then the others the remaining part.
Well, to that end, there's been a lot of proposals to change the leadership of CYFD into an independent panel that's not a gubernatorial appointee. It's sort of removing politics from its leadership. Similarly, there's also been proposals to make the Economic Development Department independent so that you're not changing every 4 years, every 8 years, the head of the Independent Economic Development Agency. Would you allow either of those agencies to become independent?
Okay, I got to explain it this way, and hopefully you understand where I'm coming from. In New Mexico, I think there's like 110 incorporated cities. Only two cities that the mayor is in charge of the whole city, the strong form leadership. Albuquerque's one, and Santa Fe is kind of like that too. And the reason why I say that, so in Las Cruces, remember earlier I said, the only thing that I have, and I don't have veto power, someone thought I did, only thing I have in the charter allows me is to propose policy, and I have to sell my council members that opportunity to move in that direction. Before I left, I mean, I would basically get with the city manager and say, I need these particular areas, they're getting kind of hot. Maybe we need the police to be over there a little bit more, and he would do that. And then some of my council members would find out about it, and they had a different philosophy than I did, and they, during their monthly meetings, would tell the city manager, you know what, I don't think we like the police being so tough on this particular demographic, and so they'd pull back, because that city manager is not hired, is hired by me too, but I'm only 1 vote. Once that city manager has 4 votes against them, in this case, Las Cruces, they could be fired. Okay? And so what I'm trying to get at is this. When you have government of the people, by the people, and for the people, that's exactly what you get here in Albuquerque. It's on Tim's watch. If it goes well, he gets the credit. If it goes bad, he gets the credit. If you take this away from the governor's purview, I mean, I'm all for fixing it. I can fix it. But if you take it away from me and then a whole different organization runs it, people aren't going to remember that. They're not going to know the inner workings. They're going to say, knucklehead Ken, he can't just get it done. you know? And so it needs to be the way it is. And the bottom line is you need to elect people who you believe, I'm looking for a job, all right? You are my employers. I'm proposing my plans. I have a resume. I may not have the name recognition that some of my colleagues have, but I can tell you without a doubt, I am the best qualified. I can move this state forward. I can unite New Mexico. I can make this work. But unfortunately, if it doesn't happen and you get something else, that's who we blame. And so I have to be able to have at my wherewithal all the tools in my toolbox.
I'm curious to ask you, as a former four-term mayor, what do you think about the idea of unstaggering city council and school board races with the goal of not having an election every fourth year? So we'd elect all city councils and school boards every 4 years, and then we wouldn't need to come back on an odd number year and have any elections.
The reason why it's staggered is for experience. It really is. So every 2 years, I'd have a couple new council members, and I would meet with them before they got sworn in. If it was just 2, it was okay, but if there was 3, you can't violate the Open Meetings Act. And I would explain to them, because I would see what they were running on. I remember there was one that would say, oh, I don't want any billboards, I don't want any business to have signs on their wall, on their buildings. And I would explain to them. I said, I know this is what you want. I know that you made a lot of promises when you're out campaigning. But keep in mind, businesses provide 60% of our income. And if you start and taking that away from them, then it's going to hurt. And we're not going to have the money to pay our police, our fire, things of this nature. So when we have that staggered term, it helps so that we don't have a bunch of, imagine if everyone was brand new. I see this with our friends in Juarez, Mexico. Back then, the mayor served 3 years, okay? I'll never forget this. There was Mayor Munguia. He had 3 years to do whatever, and then the new mayor would come in and redo everything that the other one did. They never got any progress. Now they've changed it where they can get elected for another three-year terms, and they seem to be doing a lot better. So when you have that, and I get where you're going from, because it costs money to run a campaign. That's why I'm okay with ranked choice voting, because that's the instant runoff, and you don't have to keep spending extra monies for these runoff elections.
Okay, this is going to be the last question, and then I'll give you a chance to do a closing statement. Annalisa Jacobson asks, what's your position on BlackRock purchasing PNM, and how do you plan to protect consumers from skyrocketing electricity costs or water costs?
That's a great one. I don't like, I'll never forget back in the 90s, before it was the PRC, it was called the PUC, Public Utilities Corporation, and they would regulate towing companies. And I remember they're saying, oh, let's undo the regulation, and that's going to help bring in more competition, and prices are going to go down. I can remember to tow a vehicle, now granted this is in the mid-90s, $30, $35 to tow a vehicle. Now, it's at least 4 times that. Anytime you take away the government's regulation of, especially public utilities, the prices are going to increase. I don't care what they say. I remember talking to Senator Udall, because I said, these are monopolies. Utilities are monopolies, and they're guaranteed a certain rate of return. That's why they do certain things to make this return work. Now the bad thing is, the reason why you're seeing a lot of these utilities being sold, El Paso Electric was sold, PNM, is because state government is trying to tell these power companies that you need to go to, within a certain year, you need to be either at all renewable energy or whatever is the combination, and they can't do it. They can't do it on their smaller budgets. That's why they have to somehow go to a different method, and now what we've done is we've ruined New Mexico that way. So, I'm all for a clean environment. I mean, I love to breathe clean air, but if the United States was 100% compliant, and all these other countries, and they're not doing it, we would only affect climate change by 1/3. So what I'm trying to get at is, and these other countries, whether it's China, whether it's India, they're not helping. And so this is jobs here in New Mexico, and but we have to have a balance. We can't let them, put in centers and ruin our water. I'm amazed in Las Cruces, we will require $1 million bond or $1 million proof of insurance if you're going to even rent our park. And I don't even think they have those kind of safety mechanisms for companies doing drilling of oil. Well, we're going to change that, because that's not fair that the public has to pick up this and clean it up. Did any of you watch that movie Civil Action with John Travolta? And the EPA, and I've worked with the EPA. They made us clean up something that wasn't even our doing. We were given some land that the federal government had back during World War II, but we negotiated with them and we got it clean and we did what we needed to do. And that's what we need to hold companies accountable. The bottom line is, I don't like public utilities being sold to an organization, because once you lose that control, that's tough. But I remember asking the senator, how do we undo this? He says, Ken, I don't know. You couldn't answer that, because those utilities have a monopoly, plus a good return.
Well, thank you so much for coming, and I'm just going to give you a chance to do a closing statement. Before I do, though, I'm just going to do some public service announcements. If you could return your lanyards back there, there's a little basket by the exit. That'd be really great on your way out. We'd love to see you again for the next in our series, which I believe is Greg Hull. We're gonna have to. We'll give you dates. The dates are posted online, and we'll figure it out. If you're not a subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal, please do subscribe. It helps us to support these kinds of independent journalism, these kinds of forums, and we really do hope that we can continue these community conversations moving forward with your support. So please do subscribe. And beyond that, I'm going to give you a few minutes to just make your closing statement. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you very much for coming here this evening and having a chance to hear what I have to say. But more importantly, I want to thank the Albuquerque Journal for allowing me to participate. Earlier, you heard me talk about how there are certain organizations that felt, because I'm not technically on the ballot yet, that I shouldn't be allowed to participate. But I can't thank you enough for giving me this opportunity to share my vision, share my thoughts. But as I go back to what I said, I believe that I am the most qualified person to be governor of New Mexico. I've seen a lot of things that have worked, and I've seen a lot of things that haven't. And I want to be able to take the things that work. I love our state. You do too. That's why you live here. But I know that we can move the needle. And if I can't move the needle, I will not stand for re-election. This election has been really fun. I've enjoyed it a lot. I don't enjoy being the underdog, because usually I'm the guy that they're trying to knock out. Here, I'm just trying to get my foot in the door, and the door keeps getting shut. And sometimes I get my foot in there and they still try to shut it, but that's okay. I'm having a great time, and I've got a chance to meet a lot of great people. But more importantly, I recognize there's so much that we really can do, but it all gets right down to electing someone who you believe that can move the state forward, and I believe I am that person. So I appreciate your support, appreciate your vote, and if JC hasn't given you our card, we'll give it to you so you can sign our petition. And if not, just go to kenfornewmexico.com. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.